GamingBolt presents 13 bosses that were just bullet sponges. Boss fights are something that most, if not all, gamers look forward to, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're all the most blissful experience. Often they have a way with frustrating you in interesting ways, such as making the boss you're fighting against really strong or giving them too much health. Encounters like these become more battles of attrition than anything else, and while some manage to keep things interesting by making the battle genuinely challenging, others are just plain exasperating. In this feature, we're going to take a look at 13 bosses that were just bullet sponges. The Skulls. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. The Metal Gear franchise has a pedigree of featuring some truly excellent boss fights, but much like a host of other things, that changed with the Phantom Pain. The Skulls were some of the few bosses present in the game, and sadly enough, encounters with them were fairly disappointing. Far from being able to stand up against the likes of the Foxhound unit in Metal Gear Solid or the BB Corps in Guns of the Patriots, the Skulls failed to make a mark in any way, shape, or form. Cyberdemon. Doom. Cyberdemons have had a major presence in Doom since the franchise's early days, and while the battle against the Cyberdemon in the 2016 reboot was an excellent one, it still took a lot of bullets to take that beast down. Not only does it sustain a heavy amount of damage before going down, it also has plenty of moves in its arsenal that can send you to your grave in a blink. Constant movement is key in this battle, and it takes a while to be done with. Loads of bosses. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker was full of boss battles, many of which were amazing, but many of them were also serious bullet sponges. The boss fights against armored vehicles, tanks, and the like in the extra ops missions come to mind immediately, but to be truthful, a great many bosses in Peace Walker can be called bullet sponges. Then again, the game plays host to some amazing boss fights, so perhaps this is one example of a game that employs bullet sponges properly. The Destroyer, Borderlands. The battle against the Destroyer in the first Borderlands game is an exercise in patience. That's the best way to describe it, really. It isn't particularly challenging, but defeating the Destroyer can still take a while simply because of just how much damage it can take. In fact, killing it actually requires players to shoot more bullets than they can carry with them, and having to scavenge for ammo in the middle of the fight makes things even more testing. Golgoroth, Destiny. Destiny is a pretty major offender in this area, with pretty much all of its bosses, at least before the Taken King rolled around, being bullet sponges. One particular enemy, however, takes the cake. The Golgoroth, the second boss of the Raid King's Fall, is a pain in the butt, and not because he is particularly tough to beat. Like so many other Destiny bosses, it takes an insane amount of bullets to take this monstrosity down, what with it having upwards of 10 million HP. Warden Eternal, Halo 5 Guardians. Defeating the Warden Eternal in Halo 5 isn't a particularly tough feat on lower difficulties, but on the game's higher difficulties, it's a different story. You have to damage him to reveal his weak spot, which obviously is the key to ultimately defeating him, but getting to that point in and of itself can take a while. He's not even the only bullet sponge boss in the game. In Warzone, most bosses are essentially tougher versions of enemies, but taking them down is a lot harder. Ikazuchi Omega, Yakuza Dead Souls. Yakuza Dead Souls was a strange little spin-off that was quite different from what one usually expect Yakuza games to be. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very good one, and the final boss battle against Ikazuchi Omega is a perfect example of that fact. Its attacks were easy to telegraph and dodge or avoid, while it also had huge amounts of health. Not only was this boss a huge bullet sponge, the entire encounter was ultimately unchallenging and frankly uninteresting. Bogey Alpha and Bogey Bravo, Vanquish. The fight against Bogey Alpha and Bogey Bravo in Vanquish was a nightmarishly hard one on higher difficulties, but even on normal, it was a struggle to get through. Unlike many other entries in this feature, they weren't hard to best just because they could take a lot of hits. No, getting past this boss presented an actual challenge for the players. Using cover and hard-hitting weapons in this boss fight was quite vital. USTANAK-Resident Evil 6. USTANAK in Resident Evil 6 was a lot like Nemesis, as many Resident Evil fans would tell you, and despite the game's spotty reputation, it stands out as one of the best enemies in the entire series. Not only can it withstand extremely high amounts of firepower, it also has a number of devastating attacks, for which it employs everything from its close-range weapons to its long-range projectiles to even some pretty strong melee attacks. This beast may look slow and hulking, but it is deceptively agile. General Rom, Gears of War. The fight against General Rom in Gears of War is one that you probably remember, if you've played the game at least, and especially if you've played on insane difficulty, though it's pretty tough even on normal. Rom himself is a bullet sponge, of course, but he's also a nightmare to fight against in so many other ways. He has attacks that can instantly kill you, while getting too close to him is also a pretty sure-shot way of finding yourself shredded, something that is made even more maddening by the fact that he's always trying to close in on you. Dominus Gall, Destiny 2. Whether or not Destiny 2's Gall was a good villain from a narrative standpoint is something that is up for discussion, but one thing that is certain is that the fight against him in the game was a terribly disappointing one. Rather than making it center around any mechanics that could actually challenge the player, it made the same grave mistakes so many other boss fights in the series do. Destiny 2 gave Gall ridiculous amounts of health, and the encounter against him was basically about whittling him down while occasionally reloading and dodging some of his attacks. Paul Serene, Quantum Break. Quantum Break had bullet sponges even for regular enemies on various occasions, and disappointingly enough, the final boss, Paul Serene, was one too. What's more, he could unleash some pretty dangerous attacks that could end things for the player pretty quickly, but the fact that Serene was a bullet sponge wasn't the only reason this particular fight was so disappointing. It was just so poorly designed in general, one that was frustratingly difficult rather than rewardingly challenging. Colonel Bliss, Tom Clancy's The Division. Enemies in The Division could often be pretty bullet spongy, and perhaps Colonel Bliss is one of the best examples to illustrate that point. Granted, beating him at higher levels is pretty easy, even if you're playing solo, but if you aren't over-leveled, things get a lot more interesting. That said, keeping behind cover and using a sniper rifle in the battle is usually a pretty good strategy. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.